Yeah, thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Dan Grace. I am part of Liatrio's client solutions team. I'm based out of Philadelphia, and we're here to talk to you today about a pattern we've been witnessing for a while now across industries, which is our ability to inject AI capabilities across the entire PDLC. So excited to have you with us, and we're looking forward to today's discussion. I'm joined by my colleague, Josh Guice. Josh, you want to give a quick intro?
Sure, yeah. Josh Guice, principal architect by title, like it says on the slide. Not really what I'm doing these days. I am helping to drive innovation for Liatrio and our customers. And so most of my time, as you can imagine, is spent revolving around AI. How can we use AI to make the world a better place, ultimately?
All right. So why don't we go forward a slide and we'll kind of set some grounding here. Around a little over three years ago, I guess now, Copilot burst onto the scene, offered. Oh, and by the way, we're going to hold questions. If you do have questions, please post them. We're going to take a Q&A session at the end. But Copilot burst onto the scene, offered this revolution in software development, right, on the shoulders of AI. And just like most organizations, we jumped all over Copilot like most teams did. And I think things went from kind of that autocomplete capability, and then the agentic scene exploded. And that's really where we saw this problem statement arise, which was our development community is very well represented from an AI perspective. So we went from Copilot, now there's Claude Code and Codex and Cursor and all these other compelling capabilities that are really aimed at the dev cycle as part of the broader product development life cycle. And so now there's this interesting gap where other personas like our product owners, our QA teams, our architect teams, our design and UX teams, for some reason are a little less represented than the dev community seems to be. So this is a solution space that we've been looking to kind of close those gaps, and have had some successes doing so. Today's webinar is where we'll be doing more showing than telling around how we've gone about injecting those capabilities across that full product development lifecycle. Before we kill the slideware and get into the live demo, just a few things to keep in mind. So what are you about to see? What is this and what is this not? So I'll just cover these 4 talking points quickly, and then we'll get to the fun part, which will be the live demonstration. Furthest to the left, this is not a Liatrio large language model. It is very much LLM agnostic. So you could use GPT or Gemini or Bedrock or really anything. The same way it is model agnostic, it's also technology agnostic. And what I mean by that is you'll hear Josh refer to market leading tools like Jira or SharePoint or Claude even. But those technologies could also be ripped and replaced for whichever tools are readily available to your teams today. The second one, end-to-end digital personas, there will be a simulation of an engineering team for today's conversation, and you'll see them occupy different roles from product owner to developer to design. But the intent of this solution is meant to be end-to-end. Today's demo is not so much focused on the operations side of that, but the capabilities certainly exist. The third piece, greenfield and brownfield ready. What we mean by that is the demo today, just to give everyone an equal opportunity to kind of walk the PDLC together, we're going to start with a greenfield use case. We've got an existing platform we want to push a new feature to. We'll break that down into bite-sized chunks of work. We'll do some rapid prototyping, and then we'll do the actual development as well. However, if there are brownfield use cases that come to mind, namely in the modernization or migration spaces, or just supporting legacy systems, these AI capabilities have come a long way in the past probably 12 to 18 months to deliver as compelling capabilities in the brownfield estate. So if that's of interest, happy to arrange a fast follow conversation. The last thing, we are a services-based engineering consultancy. This is not a SaaS solution. So if you like what you see here today, or if you're building something similar, the way that we enable our clients to adopt these workflows would be with your people and your tools in your environment. And just one last plug for Liatrio, if you've never heard of us, what differentiates us in the consulting space is we're deep engineering experts, but our intent is to upskill and enable the engineering teams of our clients and create no long-term dependency on us. So that is how we go about enabling these types of solutions. So let's get out of PowerPoint, Josh, if you want to tee up some of the live demo here.
Yes. All right, here we go. Just wanted to thank everyone for the time. It's our most precious resource, and I really appreciate that everyone is choosing to spend it here and see the little story that we've got for you. So this is a part of the agentic product development lifecycle. This is where a product owner is taking an idea from just a conversation about it. It's already been decided this is the right thing to do. So whatever market signals or inputs lead to that kind of, sensing, whether it's viable, feasible, all of that. Like that's already happened in this story. And this story ends with just a little bit of development. We take you through some of the development, but it's just one example of a thread that we are creating so you can get the idea. There's a lot of dimensions of this, different teams at different fluency levels. This will look a bit different. There's plenty of opportunities in this for collaboration and pairing that we're not necessarily showing, just trying to keep it simple and start with a simple version of it. So, pretty much any value stream within a company, we tend to think of businesses as just collections of value streams, internal to internal, internal to external. There's lots of variations of this, but it starts with having some kind of idea, and then I build something that's hopefully useful, and ship that, and value is received on the other end. And so you've got this, start to end stream. If you are familiar with team topologies at all, you might have heard the term stream aligned teams. This is where that kind of thinking and that modeling of a business comes from. And then if we dive down a layer, we have some extra steps here. I haven't, of course, drawn them exhaustively, but just to give you an idea of the kinds of activities that go in these. This is where I would be listening to my customers, listening to the market, exploring ideas, validating whether or not those ideas are feasible, they have legs, can I make it work? Defining the specifics of that, how I need to build that, what does that actually look like? And then doing the actual development of that. And then beyond that, things like, verification, all of the different ways that we can verify security testing. And then, of course, we need to deploy that. We need to measure some things about that in the environment. And then we need to learn from that. And this, whole loop repeats. There are lots of small loops within this, again, not drawn. So today, what we're going to focus on, though, is an idea that's already validated. We're doing the exploration of trying to get all the context we can about this idea. And then what can we do to further validate that? So we think it's a good idea, but how can we prove that out? And what can we define around the specifics of that to try to get some clarity of what that idea really is? And then what can we start to actually build? And what does implementing that look like with AI at every step of the way? The scenario we're going to focus on today is one of these, but we just put this up here just to give you an idea of some of the other kinds of things that this could be used for. It's not specific really to the thing that we're doing today. It's a general approach that can apply to any of these, like Dan said, greenfield, brownfield, all possibilities here. Dan, any of these look familiar
Yeah, I was
to
going
you?
to say, for example, I've spent a good bit of time in the insurance space. So the top right, track a claim like a package. You could think of the life cycle of first notice of loss and then documentation and investigation, all the way through to the settlement of an insurance claim. That could very much be a copy paste or a different thread that we would run through this workflow. So I'd mentioned in the tee up, it's very industry agnostic, it's very use case agnostic, but we do have to pick something, and we're going to go with adding online payments because I would venture to guess some folks on this call have pets, and so would love this feature at their vet if they don't already.
Yes. Yeah. So we're going to focus on the veterinary space today. We happen to have an example application that lives under all of this, so we can validate that these ideas really work. We've done this kind of thing with customers too. But we're going to tell the story in the concept of a veterinary clinic. This is the Emerald Grove Pet Clinic. And so they're a small vet clinic, busy desk. They've got a web app, but it's not really getting a lot of love, as you can imagine. And the clients they have keep asking, can we just pay online? Like we really want to pay online because there's a big line at the vet clinic and people's pets are sometimes not getting along. And anyway, it's kind of a mess. So today the team is going to sit down and they're going to talk about what are the parameters of this? Of course, we have an AI agent that's running, doing the transcription. It's important to capture all the context because if you've been a part of any kind of conversation like this, you know that they tend to go all over the place, but there's some really good nuggets in there that happen during a meeting that are often not captured and don't make their way into requirements and downstream from that. So Dr. Carter, which is the vet in this situation, kicks off the meeting. Pet owners keep asking if they can just pay online. Dan, developer, no relation to the Dan Grace that's on this. That was just a happy accident. He is worried about our exposure or risk, the compliance. Like, what are the problems? How could this go wrong is where he's coming from. And then Lisa, who's in charge of user experience, just wants to make sure that's really simple. It can't be confusing. Have a variety of clients, different age ranges, different technological, capabilities, and wants to make sure that it's accessible to everybody in that regard. And then Tom, the office manager, he just wants it yesterday. And so there's, a line of people that form, and he really wants it to land before the busy time in the summer. Sarah, the product owner, and she is the hero of most of our story here. Her AI agent has captured all of the meeting content and has all the conversation. And she says, I'm going to have a clickable prototype for some feedback today, which of course I wanted to make people just kind of fall out of their chair when she said that, because the idea of being able to do that, especially for somebody who's a product owner and probably not a developer also or an engineer, it's kind of surprising, right? Kind of mind-boggling. But if you've been using AI anytime in the last couple of years, you know that the power to create things quickly is really incredible. So Sarah heads back to her desk. AI agent follows her, of course. And first thing she does is process the meeting transcript. So we need to get out of this meeting transcript. What are some things we would do to prototype this? What could we build? So here we're simulating AI passing through the transcript, looking for outcomes or things that are actionable. And of course, it finds pet owners who want to pay for a visit online. This also is tied back to the specific entries in the transcript. And so we've got this kind of provenance starting to develop of where this information came from. Who said that? Why did we build it this way? All of that is a sort of chain of evidence that we're starting to create with this. The next one, the first release, we're just going to do visit payments. So the vet clinic, of course, sells specialty animal food, and they also, sell pharmaceuticals and things like that. They're not going to do any of that. So trying to come up with, if you're familiar with the skateboard, scooter, bicycle kind of progression, like what is your skateboard? Checkout being simple, clear, and accessible. Of course, we need that. Compliance obligations. So we just want to figure out what's on our side of the shared responsibility model and what is something that we can push off to a different provider, payment provider, for instance. Which leads us to, let's have them handle the card data. We don't want anything really on our systems because if we have a data breach, we don't want it to be that significant where money is involved. All right, so the next thing Sarah does is kicks off the enrichment skill. And now the AI agent is going to try to go find information that's relevant to what we're trying to prototype here. Where all can I find this? Well, of course, they have a Confluence, and it's got a bunch of documents in it. So the AI agent starts running searches there and finds a web accessibility policy. So it turns out we've actually got this policy documented. Great. The next thing it finds is an architectural decision record about external integrations and how they should perform, some specifics about that. Seems like it might be relevant, so we capture that too. And we move on to another system. Again, these could be any system that you have. These are just examples that are really common in the industry. And here we found something really interesting. We actually tried to do this a couple of years ago, the pet clinic, right? And it never got finished for some reason, probably because it was almost pre-AI. And so they didn't have the tools to get this thing done. But there's a lot of information there that might be useful, some requirements that were figured out from that. Then we've got a data retention policy. This applies to the records that they have already, might be relevant. And there's a standard operating procedure for an end of day reconciliation that runs, and that's how they settle the existing payment. So there's this nightly thing. Probably need to know about that as well.
And real quick, just to say the quiet thing out loud, obviously Josh and I are kind of charting the happy path here, where it's found exclusively relevant information from what is probably a mess of a Confluence or a SharePoint site. Having implemented this with clients, there is absolutely some day zero activities. So how do you clean
Yes.
room that project specific documentation? Do you vectorize it? Do you use RAG? So we're not going to gloss over that and just assume that everyone has perfect documentation ready to query. But there is some upfront lift to get the efficiency Josh just demonstrated.
Yes, for sure. A combination of semantic search and your traditional search, things like that will make a huge difference. Like Dan said, the act of doing some kind of cleaning to begin with, helping to find cruft and maybe move it to an archive that is not the first thing searched. So you can build these kinds of layers. That's something AI can help with as well. So then we move on to the source control system. This is possibly the best source because source is the source code is the source of truth. And the AI running the skill finds the web app itself. Very important. That's what we're going to be modifying. Also finds that there's a separate billing service. So good to know about that. A notification service. This might come up later. This is how notifications happen today and how information gets sent to all of the clients. And lo and behold, there's an old pull request or merge request for this visit payments that was closed. And the research and the code in there, maybe it's relevant. Certainly could be. So yeah, like the note that we have here at the bottom says, real enterprise wikis are messy. And so we know that there's a lot more to that. But again, just want to tell the story on a thread, and that way you get the general idea. And then all of the different variations of that we'd love to explore with you. So the result of running that is this context brief. This is information that is captured from all those systems and again has a link back to. So this is a citation model starting to be very common in AI search tooling and being able to see where the data came from. Because as for any of you who've read an AI summary of a transcript of a meeting that you were actually in, there are little nuances that just sometimes get, twisted in a way that you don't want them to. So it's important to always be able to get back to the source. And that's what this accomplishes. So we've collected our compliance, some integration, kind of broken it up into some different categories, pulled it together as a package. All right, so now Sarah has enough information to start creating a prototype. She wants to track the work though. That way, this work isn't just kind of happening on the side, that it can be tracked and time bound, most importantly. She did promise that it would be done. She'd have a prototype ready for today. So AI agent goes to the Jira board. Again, this could be a Kanban board, could be linear, could be Asana, whatever work system you have. Of course, there are connectors for all of these things now. And the agent creates a spike to track this. And if you don't know, a spike is just a time-boxed investigation. And the goal really is to de-risk the idea. Can we prove that this is even worth doing by trying to build something? What can we learn from building is really the question here. And all of the information that we've gotten so far, that is all associated with this spike. And that is important because in the next step where she's running a prototyping skill, the first thing it's going to do is go pull all that information from whatever work tracking system and then probably go back and reread some of those, maybe use some sub-agents, that kind of thing. So Sarah now has, after running the prototyping skill, she's got a prototyping here just running on her system, web browser. And this is prototype V1. And it's got your basic credit card payment form. I can put in a card number, expiration date, and I can pay. I've got my sample visit here broken down with a little bit of detail. And then she sends a message in the Slack channel that was created for this particular effort and says, hey, everybody, here's a V1 pass at adding online payments. So she gives the link to the team. And from there, the team starts validating it. So she's getting feedback, really rapid feedback.
Yeah, and just to call out the meeting that took place at the top of this, let's say that was a morning meeting. At this point, it's not even lunch yet, right? And Sarah's got a prototype of V1 that she can share with her team and get some valid feedback on. So just so folks don't lose sight of the time lapse here, we're not talking about like, that was a Tuesday call and by Thursday, this prototype exists, right? It's not even lunchtime yet. So sorry, Josh, keep
Yes.
going.
No, no, it's a great point, very important to make. I thought about putting a clock on the wall just so we could see the time tick by, but one thing at a time. Okay, so we go to Lisa first. She's our UX person, so of course she's going to hammer the interface. And she clicks it, nothing seems to be happening, so she just starts madly clicking it and catches the interface on fire. So now she sends it back and says, "Hey, nothing happened when I clicked pay, so I kept clicking." And Sarah says, "Yeah, I can see that. 57 payments on payment entries on the test card, over $5,000 worth." So obviously, this is an important thing to fix. These are the kinds of issues, this may seem a little trivial, but these are the kinds of issues that only come up when you try to make something real and put it in real time and add time to the time element to what you're trying to build. A static mock-up might not have caught this kind of thing, especially, if this team, this is something that they're not necessarily that skilled in. So Sarah goes back to her AI assistant and says, users can't tell the payment worked. We need to show the processing, a confirmation, and just make sure we never charge more than once. Like that's super important, right? That is the critical rule here. So she gets another iteration of her prototype. So now we're at V2 here and shares this out with the team, sends the link in the channel. Only one payment now allowed and at a time, for a particular visit, and shows the processing status. So next, Tom, the office manager, takes a look at it, clicks pay in the test site, the prototype, and says, "Great, that went through. Where's my receipt? Like, how do I know that I can see that it went through, but there's no lasting document or any kind of evidence that this happened in the future, right? Once I close this page." And what's really important about this is they need, for purposes of insurance, some specific information on here. So back to Sarah, she creates a prototype V2, and Tom says, "I was able to get the payment through with the test card, but how do I get an insurance valid receipt?" Oh, Sarah says, "There's not one yet, so we're going to add the receipts. Just give me a minute." And goes back to the AI assistant, says, "We need the receipts specifically. They need to have the details for insurance claims." And this is where your AI agent could go research these kinds of things and learn about what are those details, because you might not necessarily know. But this is a way to get much closer to the goal much more quickly of what a done system could look like. So we come back. Now we're on V3, and you can see that she's added an itemized receipt email and lets everybody know, sends the link, goes back to Tom. Tom's going to give it another shot, processing the payment. Yay. Okay. So we got a receipt. Excellent. Tom's happy. And this all happens super quick, so he's even happier. So back to Sarah. Tom says, "That works great." And Dr. Carter takes a look and says, "You know what? This looks good. Like, this is enough. We've gone far enough with the prototype. Now let's just figure out how to build this thing for real." So she gets the emoji reactions, and everyone's happy. So now we move on to the define step. So we validated that the idea we had is feasible. We can build it. It makes sense. We know how it can work. We're starting to see a lot of the details of how the user flows go through the system. I don't know how many of you have been in the industry as long as I have. I don't want to say how many decades, but it's been some. And I remember doing this, on whiteboards and just kind of trying to draw out all of these use case flows, and they get really messy, or you try to put it in some software system, and it just takes hours to map all this stuff out. Now we have something that is the working model. Yeah, it's cardboard and duct tape, but we can reverse engineer from that what the actual user flows need to be. And this code can all be throwaway. We created it really quickly. There wasn't a huge overhead in doing that. And so we don't need to worry too much about, things like the sustainability of the code, or, getting it right. It's going to be re-implemented.
And not to disparage all you whiteboard fans out there, if in the morning meeting there was some whiteboarding being done, you could very easily take a picture of that image of the whiteboard. And when Josh was fetching context, you could say, "Hey, please also read this image. These solutions do a really good job of reading source code, plain English and images as well.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we use Miro all the time. It's great for remote collaboration. And so something like that, especially if you're not sure how it should even work and you don't even know enough to get a prototype. So those can happen at the same time. Like I said at the beginning, there's a lot of opportunities in this for pairing and collaboration that we're not showing. But that doesn't mean that we don't believe that those are the right way to do it. This is just trying to show one thread through the system. So the AI agent, now we're going into the work definition step. So we've got all of this context and a working model. Let's try to define the real work that needs to happen from this. So we close the spike. We create an epic because this is how most people use Jira. We create an epic to hold the payment processing overarching capability. And we'll start to create some stories under here. The first one we create, this one is just going to be the checkout page. We can dig into that one a little bit and look at some of the details. So this is just an example. Obviously, you'll put what's important in these, but you might have some context about this just to capture it here. So it's the overarching, why are we doing this is stated. And here's an example Agile story format statement. As a pet owner, I want a checkout page so I can pay online. There might be more of these, lots of different ways to define this work. One thing that I do want to point out here, and you may have caught it when you saw the skill pop up on the little AI assistant, is that we mentioned behavior-driven development. So this is something that we think is a really powerful way to express acceptance criteria. And the format, it says down here at the bottom, this format is called Gherkin. It's actually like a domain-specific language that you can express acceptance criteria in. And these read really easily, right? Like you can just say, oh, scenarios, customer pays for a vet visit, given a visit for Max, costing $90. When they submit the payments processed successfully. I'd probably had some extra things on here and they got charged $90 and they only got charged once. So there's a lot of ways to write this. I put down here just so you get the idea that there's quite a few of these, but this is something AI is really good at, and these are easily readable. And so you can kind of decide, yeah, that makes sense, or no, that totally doesn't make sense. That's not acceptance criteria we want. But what makes these the most powerful is that these can be really implemented on the dev side. And so these can tie to real tests that get ran and start to become part of the body of validations and quality that you're building into the software. That becomes really important for a couple of reasons. One is just catching regressions in the future as you iterate on this, but it's also giving AI a way to validate the result of its own actions. And as we know, when you do an action and you get immediate feedback on whether that was successful or not, or you did a good thing or a bad thing, then that reinforcement loop can be very tight and you can learn very quickly. And then also we show that we've got the attachments. Maybe this was in a branch, maybe it just got zipped up, doesn't really matter. Those context briefs are here too, the relevant pieces of that. So we've got the accessible checkout and the existing billing API. So then we go on in a likewise manner and just create the rest of the stories for this epic. These probably aren't like exhaustive and captured 100%, but again, this is just to give you the idea of what this might look like and try to not overwhelm with too much content. All right, so now we've got some stories in here. There could have been a collaboration point where there was some back and forth on refining those stories and making sure that the acceptance criteria was written in a really good way. But for the purposes of this, we're just going to jump to Dan, developer, and he is just going to pull EGPC 3, which is the main checkout one, and he's going to start there. So Dan fires up his little agentic CLI here. This is not meant to represent any real CLI, although it may look pretty familiar. I'll give you a quick tour. He's in the clinic portal folder, so he's got a checkout of that repository. He's made his feature branch here using a little context already because he's loaded some skills. So he is also in his AI assistant able to run spec-driven development, which is actually an open source workflow that Liatrio created. We've had it for a while now and used it with lots of our customers and gotten contributions from them. We'll send a link to that towards the end, but also a skill to be able to talk to Jira, Confluence, and SharePoint. So in his system, when he's building this, it can go all the way back to the source of that information and get that important context. There are MCPs in here too that enable this connectivity. And so if that's a term that you've heard or you're not familiar with those, it's just the mechanism by which AI can talk to kind of our more, let's call them legacy APIs at this point, things like REST interfaces and those sorts of things. So first step of running the spec-driven development workflow is to generate the spec. And this is really the workflow. It's just a series of 4 prompts. To be honest, it's not a complicated system, but those prompts have been refined and curated very carefully to get the right kind of results. And so Dan is able to say, along with that prompt, because it's just a prompt, I want you to pull this particular Jira story, but also let's use test-driven development and make sure we implement the behavior-driven scenarios as tests. So AI goes and checks out, pulls the data from Jira and reads the description, kind of goes through all of this. And one of the things we have in our spec-driven development workflow is to check the scope. Like, is this right-sized for spec-driven development workflow? Because if it's too small or too big, it's needs broken down more, or it's just not even worth the overhead. Another thing that it does is ask you some clarifying questions. So anything that wasn't clear from the requirements, then you get asked about it and you have a chance to answer it. Like here, how much of this do we want to tackle? Again, it's a skateboard, so we want to make sure that we stub out whatever we don't have. We'll wire that in another story. Another question, how about the retry? What's the retry behavior? These are the kinds of things that tend to come up when you actually go to implement something. This gets you to think about it a little bit ahead of time so you can set AI up for success and it won't do something less likelihood for unexpected behaviors, let's say. And one more of these, how do we draw the confirmation? We had it one way in the prototype, but maybe we want to change that. And so this is where there might be an iteration here. Dan might go talk to Sarah again to like, oh, another question came up. The goal is to minimize these. So thinking back to the value stream, we want to make it so there's less rework involved. It's complete and accurate more often than not. And so we're not doing these rework loops and try to shift as much of that left as we can. All right, so now we've got our spec document. This creates a document that has things like what are the goals of this work? What are the demoable units? I'm not going to get too into this. We actually do a webinar on this, an earlier one that's already out there. You can go look at a recording if you want to really, really get into it. We also did one on agent skills that I meant to mention earlier when we were talking about the skills, and that does a deep dive on agent skills. So you can go check that out too for more information. So then the next step for spec-driven development workflow is to give me my task list. So now I can see these are the steps that AI is going to take. I can double check these, make sure they all make sense. It'll actually check them off as it goes. This is a markdown. You might recognize markdown checkboxes here. And then manage tasks. So this is the step that does the actual work. So we're going to use test-driven development. So we're writing the tests first, and then we're running it. We see it fail. It's red, green refactor, one of my favorites. And then we implement the code and rinse and repeat. This is another example of creating a little feedback loop for AI. When you wrap these rails around it, you have much better results. We didn't worry about any of that with the prototype, but now that we're building it for real, we want this, these guardrails. So then all of our tests are done. We also implemented the behavior-driven development test. Step 4 is to validate that we did everything we were supposed to do. This is something we put in because getting these proof artifacts, like saving a video, so pulling up a web browser and actually walking through the checkout and saving a video and attaching that to the merge request or pull request. But what a great way to code review something if you can just go watch it without having to figure out how to necessarily get it working. Same thing for the unit test run and the behavior-driven development. So we've got all of that. Pretty much at that point, Dan's happy with this. He's going to clock out. It's the same day. Like we're reaching the end of the work day. And by the way, yeah, that open source spec-driven development, we'll give you a link to it later. So team's pretty happy. They all bow for us, our little actors on a stage that we've been manipulating, and then it's party time. They're all doing the awkward office dance as best as I could recreate it, Fable and I. And I really just want to leave you with one question. and it's what can you build with AI to gain clarity? That has been the focus of my entire job. It's just thinking about what can we build to learn more to gain clarity. All right, Dan, hand it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. If you just want to go back a slide. So thanks, everyone. Just quick recap. What Josh just demonstrated was in the same day, the ability of a team at Emerald Grove Veterinarian hypothesizing, would it be helpful for us to add online payments? The product owner is actually able to carry that ball much further down the field than normal. The product owner, Sarah, did all of the rapid prototyping, fetched context from disparate systems, got feedback from the team, and then decided, hey, this should go live in a system of record like in Jira or in Azure DevOps. And then eventually that work was picked up by a developer, and they implemented that payment capability. So we're aware that's very much the happy path. And there's, a lot of work to be done to enable teams to work in that fashion. But we do have a lot of clients that are working in that fashion today. So if there are any questions, this is how you find myself or Josh or Liatrio in general. We will be packaging up the slideware, the recording of this webinar, so keep an eye on your inbox. And not just questions, but if your teams are building something similar or exploring something similar, we would love to hear feedback around what you found challenging or valuable that may differ or be in addition to what we showed today. So
Yeah, I'll add that there are really advanced versions of this. Agentic teams doing the work. You've probably seen some of that. We're doing some of this at different levels with many of our clients. And also, if you happen to be going to AI4, I will be there, and this is going to be a breakout session. Probably refine it a bit by then because everything is iterative. So I'd love to connect. Find me on LinkedIn, and maybe we can say hi in person and have a chat.
yeah, so we got a few minutes here. If there are any questions, myself or Josh can address, would welcome those.
I'll add that we're working on a part two of this that goes back through the same story, but a real implementation. So here's the nuts and bolts of it. Here's me running a skill. Here's me connecting it to a real Confluence, a real Jira with a bunch of messy things in it. And then there's a whole follow-up version of this that we're also exploring and working on around automated governance. So how do we use things like SigStore Stack, if you've heard of that, attestations, policy languages like Rego policy to validate that AI did everything that we thought it should do and that this is secure and compliant and all of those things.
And I'll make one last plug. There's also a version that goes even further left than where we started today, which was we agreed that we need online payments. There's a version of this which is how do we listen to call logs that might uncover some pain points that we could use to decide what we should be building.
Yeah. We got a question in the chat. Thanks, Brian. And anonymous attendee is asking for prototyping. Are we recommending skills that are built in-house or things like Claude Design or others? Right now, I would encourage you to try them all and find out what works for you. There is definitely a case where some customization is going to be needed on top of whatever is out there. So, we use Claude Design as well, but we have some skills that apply our branding or our particular voice and way of thinking. And so it tends to be a mixture of both of those. Looks like I got another one from Danielle. In environments where MCP is disabled for security, have you found approaches that export to CSV for the work item uploaded to be successful via skill templates? Or does MCP end up being required to make the most of the refinement side of the fence? It's definitely possible to, I'll say, like almost hand carry the data back and forth. I think this is one of the things that's different about Liatrio is we challenge things like MCP is disabled for security. Let's dig into that. What is it about MCP that is not secure? I'm actually working with a company in the biotech space, and they're using a secure MCP gateway that lets them get the compliance and the observability that they need and still enable their employee base to utilize MCPs in a safe way. So I think there are possibilities out there where there's a why not both, answer to that. We've got another question from Hadi. Things that you consider when working on a POC, then when imagining to move forward for deploying to pilot, how would you rethink or revise some of the developments, like ejecting auth when it's too late? We've definitely simplified that prototyping step. I think there's a version of this where that prototype lives on and continues to be a source of learning for a really complex implementation or, complex feature. Some of the clients we work with have, I'll try not to disparage them too much, extremely messy monolithic applications that when we map out how they all talk to each other and the modules in them, it's just a string art or spaghetti. And so it's really hard to work on these safely. And that's where, again, we would push on the architecture of that. Can we break this up into smaller pieces, apply some team topology thinking or domain-driven design, and figure out some bounded context that we can help you start to modernize that application, because that may actually be the source of some of the problems and you're just trying to deal with the symptoms. And often that's an iterative approach where let's deal with the symptoms as they are today, but then let's try to figure out what's really causing this and can we have an impact on that. Thank you for the questions, by the way. I've got another one. In a complex payment ecosystem, would an AI agent risk becoming lost in the volume of information, or can it maintain sufficient context and traceability to produce a complete and reliable requirement set? I think that what's interesting here is there are a lot of strategies to help AI employ like a progressive discovery. And so one that I didn't really show is, although it'd be really cool with this animation style thing, to have subagents go out and do this work and try to find the information. It all comes down to context engineering. And so if you go back and watch, I think our probably earliest webinar on just, an AI intro, AI jumpstart, that one, we talk about context engineering and context management. And it's really a context problem. It's like we have an ocean of context and we're trying to find very specific things in it. So how can we filter that and find the information that we need? There's a lot of strategies that can help with that, like Dan was talking. And then on the topic of creating a complete requirement set, this is where we didn't show this, of course, today, but there's an iteration in that development too. So Dan takes his first pass at that story, deploys it to a pre-production environment, and then people test that as well, right? Like you've got some feedback going. And so the question really is, how much information do you need to get started and take the next step? Probably it won't be complete until you've actually built it and deployed it all the way. There's certainly things that you want to think about, but maybe a different way of thinking. All right, rolling in now. Let's see. Sometimes the client business is interested, though very less engaged or less likely to contribute because they have no idea what AI is. How do you handle those sorts of scenarios? That is exactly what I have been doing in very recent weeks, is working with project managers, product owners, other people in the business, quotes, that don't even have the tool set up maybe, or they have the tool set up, but they really have no idea where to start with them. The answer is enablement. We've just got to go spend time with them and take the work that they're trying to do and show them how they could do that work in a new way. I think that's one of the other things that's different about Liatrio is we are very enablement and pairing heavy. We don't just go do staff augmentation or go build something and throw it over the wall. We go pair with the people who are going to own it long term. So there's no knowledge transfer. It's just they've learned to do it because they built it with us. We built it together.
I would just add to that, we have a very well-proven approach to this AI enablement, especially for non-technical users. We refer to it as Forge. Oftentimes when we implement with clients, they rename it. But yeah, happy to share documentation around how we go about delivering that curriculum and making it real for those non-technical users as well.
Yeah. Next question is Liatrio leveraged AI for the day zero documentation work that helps improve the quality of the spike output for prototyping. So that's that enhancement, enrichment, kind of going and pulling all of that information together. Definitely. And then question follow up on that. Any agents or approaches you found successful? For instance, finding conflicting aging documentation. The effort that Dan mentioned of trying to make a pass through the system and using AI to discover what might be outdated, putting a human in the loop there to do some review. This is the case where the job of somebody like a librarian or curator or technical writer is not necessarily going away, but it might be different because they might be using these tools to quickly see the body of information that's in a system like Confluence and then start to follow up with some of the owners of that to make decisions about what can we archive or, move off to another system to try to shrink that ocean so it's smaller. But yes, definitely I think the question is, what don't we use AI for, really? Because, when you're in the power suit controlling it, it can be really powerful. If you're expecting to just hand the problem to it and get the answer back, not very successful in most cases. Will, what's your experience if the AI isn't giving good outputs at different parts of the workflow? For example, let's say that AI isn't writing good epics or stories. What can you do to improve the AI output? This is actually the same answer as what would you do if you had this, like, let's say you hired an intern and you have this exact same problem with them. You would show them an example of what good looks like. Maybe give them some examples and some counter examples and say why this is a bad example and why this is a good example. All of that can be wrapped into the context for a skill and becomes really useful in helping AI learn. There's also Anthropic, I believe, created, maybe somebody else created, and they've just put it in their general catalog. But there's a skill creator skill out there. We can find a link and make sure that you get that. If you haven't seen it, one of the things that it enables you to do is create these evals for your skill, where it tries to accomplish a task with and without the skill and measure the success rate. So you can start to put a little bit of science around it. Even though these LLMs are non-deterministic, it doesn't mean that you can't kind of draw some lines around the rough patterns that are happening there. And within a boundary, of probability, you get consistency.
I would also add, Will, to your question, specific to reference of things like epics and stories, that those day zero activities become immensely important. Obviously, I think everyone's familiar with the garbage in, garbage out, and also the ability to templatize those things. So kind of take the cognitive load off of whoever's authoring these epics and stories. Don't worry about how they're formatted. Let your development team tell them that. They're just more responsible for what context they're providing and the quality of the information. And the last thing I would say is you can also have these things kind of learn over time to prioritize drafts of epics and stories that are actually published and say, hey, let's mimic that behavior. That's what the users were actually wanting or expecting and publishing.
Yeah, great follow-up. Okay, now we have one more. I think FDE, forward deployed engineer, is sort of the trending role to play in these types of scenarios. Definitely.
We think so too.
Yes, 1,000%. We have a number of us who were recently a Cursor partner, and we have a number of us who have gone through their FDE partner boot camp and are certified forward deployed engineers. Cursor is one of the many tools that we use. While we have partnerships, we're very tool agnostic because we always want to use the best thing for the customer. But it is important to keep up with those who are leaders in the space and understand how they're thinking about this and how they're actioning on it across their client base. Let's see, one more from Brian. I use my spec review skills. Okay. Not a question, but a thing to share. Agentic dev team. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I love the collaboration here. And that's one of the things that we do at clients a lot too, is we see cases where on the fluency maturity curve, they're just starting to have people that are building these kinds of skills. And then the question is, how can we share this across the team or promote these, good practices so they become emerging standards? Lots of answers to that, but that's one of the areas where we're seeing a lot of activity right now and helping our clients accomplish that. All right, I totally lost track of time like I tend to do. So,
Yeah, we're a few minutes over, but
all right.
well worth staying. Thanks so much to everybody who attended. I appreciate the questions and the collaboration toward the end. I did see something pop up. Where can we see these other webinars that we've been referencing? So everyone that registered for this webinar will get the slideware, the recording of the video itself, as well as the links to access the spec-driven development and the agent skill webinars that we've already hosted. And you know where to find us. So any questions,
Yeah.
please reach out. We'd love to continue the dialogue. And if you do feel you had teammates that weren't able to attend today, feel free to share the package that you receive with them as well.
Yeah, there will be a recording. If LinkedIn search is any good, you can probably search for Liatrio webinars and find them, but we'll send out links just to facilitate that. So yeah, thanks for the time. Really, really appreciate everyone sticking around, and hopefully we'll see you again sometime.
Yeah, much appreciated. Thank you, folks.